I'm Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. And when 14 million Americans are out of work, we need a new president to end the Obama depression.
Governor? If you look at a poll in the Boston Globe just the other day, 54% of Republican voters in this state say they're willing to have higher taxes on the wealthy to help bring down the deficit. Are they wrong?
Well, no. The question is, would it in fact increase jobs or kill jobs? The Reagan recovery, which I participated in passing, in 7 years created for this current economy the equivalent of 25 million new jobs, raised federal revenue by $800 billion a year in terms of the current economy, and clearly worked. It's a historic fact. The Obama administration is an anti-jobs, anti-business, anti-American energy, destructive force, and we shouldn't talk about what we do in 2013. The Congress this year, this next week, ought to repeal the Dodd-Frank bill. They ought to repeal the Sarbanes-Oxley bill. They ought to start creating jobs right now, because for those 14 million Americans, this is a depression now.
Mr. Speaker, you have, I'll let you, Mr. Speaker, you have at times said, you know, maybe you do have to consider a mandate. You've been very open to the individual mandate. It has become, it seems, at least at the moment, a litmus test in this Republican primary. Should it be?
Yes, it should be. If you explore the mandate, which even the Heritage Foundation at one time looked at, the fact is, when you get into a mandate, it ultimately ends up with unconstitutional powers. It allows the government to define virtually everything, and if you can do it for health care, you can do it for everything in your life, and therefore we should not have a mandate. But I want to answer Sylvia at a different level. This campaign cannot be only about the presidency. We need to pick up at least 12 seats in the U.S. Senate and 30 or 40 more seats in the House, because if you are serious about repealing Obamacare, you have to be serious about building a big enough majority in the legislative branch that you could actually, in the first 90 days, pass the legislation. So I just think it's very important to understand, it's not about what one person in America does, it's about what the American people do, and that requires a senatorial majority as well as a presidency.
All right, we'll have more time to discuss the health care issue. Let's get down to the floor. Jennifer Vaughn from WMUR has a question from a voter. Speaker, I assume you agree, and as you come into the conversation, one of the criticisms, you tell me whether it's fair or not, one of the criticisms has been, as you watch some of these governors deal with this issue across the country, that some people say there's a tone about it, that they seem to be trying to demonize public employees or union workers.
Well, that's a totally different question. The question that was asked was right to work. And one of the things the Congress should do immediately is defund the National Labor Relations Board, which has gone into South Carolina to punish Boeing, which wants to put 8,000 American jobs in South Carolina by fundamentally eliminating right to work at the National Labor Relations Board. Now, that's a real immediate threat from the Obama administration to eliminate right to work, and I think that it is fundamentally the wrong direction. I hope that New Hampshire does adopt right to work. I'd frankly keep it at the state level, because as each new state becomes right to work, they send the signal to the remaining states, don't be stupid. Why would you want to be California's unemployment level when you could be Texas's employment level or North Dakota's? And I think if you believe in the 10th Amendment, we ought to let the states learn from each other. And the right-to-work states are creating a lot more jobs today than the heavily unionized states. The public employee union question is a totally different issue.
All right, maybe we'll come.
Thanks, John. This question goes out to Speaker Gingrich. Next month, the Space Shuttle program is scheduled to retire after 30 years. And last year, President Obama effectively killed government-run spaceflight to the International Space Station and wants to turn it over to private companies. In the meantime, U.S. astronauts would ride Russian spacecraft at a cost of $50 to $63 million a seat. What role should the government play in future space exploration?
Well, sadly, and I say this sadly because I'm a big fan of going into space, and I actually worked to get the shuttle program to survive at one point, NASA has become an absolute case study in why bureaucracy can't innovate. If you take all the money we've spent at NASA since we landed on the moon, and you applied that money for incentives to the private sector, we would today probably have a permanent station on the moon, 3 or 4 permanent stations in space, a new generation of lift vehicles, and instead, what we've had is bureaucracy after bureaucracy after bureaucracy and failure after failure. I think it's a tragedy, because younger Americans ought to have the excitement of thinking that they, too, could be part of reaching out to a new frontier. You know, you'd asked earlier, John, about this idea of limits because we're a developed country. We're not a developed country. The scientific future is going to open up, and we're at the beginning of a whole new cycle of extraordinary opportunities, and unfortunately, NASA is standing in the way of it, when NASA ought to be getting out of the way and encouraging the private sector. You mischaracterized me. I didn't say end the space program. We built the transcontinental railroads without a national department of railroads. I said you could get into space faster, better, more effectively, more creatively if you decentralized it, got it out of Washington, and cut out the bureaucracy. It's not about getting rid of the space program. It's about getting to a real space program that works.
Speaker, Dancing with the Stars or American Idol?
American Idol.
American Idol it is. Our candidates continue their debate in just a moment. Stay with us. Mr. Speaker, I want to bring you into this conversation because I'm looking down. I want to get the words just right. Your initial reaction to the Ryan plan was a radical, right-wing social engineering. Then you backtrack. Why?
Well, first of all, there was a very narrow question which said, should Republicans impose an unpopular bill on the American people? Now, I supported the Ryan budget as a general proposal. I actually wrote a newsletter supporting the Ryan budget. And those words were taken totally out of context. I'm happy to repeat them. If you're dealing with something as big as Medicare and you can't have a conversation with the country where the country thinks what you're doing is the right thing, you better slow down. Remember, we all got mad at Obama because he ran over us when we said don't do it. Well, the Republicans ought to follow the same ground rule. If you can't convince the American people it's a good idea, maybe it's not a good idea. So let me start with there. Second, there are certain things I would do different than Paul Ryan on Medicare. I agree strongly with him on Medicaid. I think it could be done. But let me just say two quick things.
Quickly.
Congressman Tom Price has a very good bill in that would allow private contracting so those people who want to voluntarily could contract with their doctor or their hospital in addition to Medicare, and it would be outside the current system, and it would relieve the pricing pressure in the current system. We did a study called Stop Paying the Crooks. We think you can save $70 to $120 billion in Medicare and Medicaid annually by not paying crooks.
We have to
two examples.
Mr. Speaker, go ahead.
I just want to comment for a second. You know, the Pakistani who immigrated to the U.S., became a citizen, built a car bomb, which luckily failed to go off in Times Square, was asked by the federal judge, how could he have done that when he signed and when he swore an oath to the United States? And he looked at the judge and he said, you're my enemy. I lied. Now, I just want to go out on a limb here. I am in favor of saying to people, if you're not prepared to be loyal to the United States, you will not serve in my administration, period.
Amen. All right,
we did this in dealing with the Nazis, and we did this in dealing with the communists, and it was controversial both times. And both times we discovered after a while, you know, there are some genuinely bad people who would like to infiltrate our country, and we have got to have the guts to stand up and say no.
All right, we're going to work in another speaker.
Well, I helped author the Defense of Marriage Act, which the Obama administration should be, frankly, protecting in court. I think if that fails, at that point you have no choice except to go to a constitutional amendment.
Speaker?
Well, I think it's very powerful that both the Army and the Marines overwhelmingly opposed changing it, that their recommendation was against changing it. And if, as president, I've met with them and they said, you know, it isn't working, it is dangerous, it's disrupting unit morale, and we should go back, I would listen to the commanders whose lives are at risk about the young men and women that they are, in fact, trying to protect.
There are an estimated maybe 20 million illegal immigrants in this country. People have different numbers. If you were going to round them all up, Congressman Tom Tancredo on this stage 4 years ago would have said, round them up and kick them out. They broke the law. They shouldn't be here. I don't know where the money would come from in this environment. So I want your sense. Is that what the states should be doing? The federal government should be spending money and resources on? Or like President Bush and like Senator McCain, at least in the McCain-Kennedy days, should we have some path to status for those who are willing to step up and admit where they are and come out of the shadows?
One of the reasons this country's in so much trouble is that we are determined among our political elites to draw up catastrophic alternatives. You either have to ship 20 people out of America or legalize all of them. That's nonsense. We're never going to pass a comprehensive bill. Obama proved that in the last 2 years. He couldn't get a comprehensive bill through with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, and he didn't even try because he knew he couldn't do it. You break this down. Herman Cain's essentially right. You break it down. First of all, you control the border. We can ask the National Guard to go to Iraq. We ask the National Guard to go to Kuwait. We ask the National Guard to go to Afghanistan. Somehow we would have done more for American security if we had had the National Guard on the border. But if you don't want to use the National Guard, just one last example. If you don't want to use the National Guard, take half of the current Department of Homeland Security bureaucracy in Washington, transplant it to Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. You'll have more than enough people to control the border. But
All right, let's...
No, but let me say this, John. No serious citizen who's concerned about solving this problem should get trapped into a yes-no answer in which you're either for totally selling out, protecting America, or you're for totally kicking out 20 million people in a heartless way. There are humane, practical steps to solve this problem if we get the politicians and the news media to just deal with it honestly.
Question, was it in the vital national interest of the United States? And as you do so, I had a conversation with a soon-to-be candidate who's not here tonight, Governor Huntsman, recently, who said he didn't think so when it came to vital national interest, and he also said we can't afford it right now. Should the price tag be a factor when you're the commander-in-chief of the United States?
Well, sure. The price tag's always a factor because, as General Eisenhower, once he was president, pointed out, as Abraham Lincoln understood, as George Washington understood, that's a part of the decision. But I think what Congressman Bachmann just said ought to really sober everybody about how much trouble we're in. 10 years after 9/11, our intelligence is so inadequate that we have no idea what percent of the Libyan rebels are, in fact, al-Qaeda. Libya was the second largest producer of people who wanted to kill Americans in Iraq. And I think that we need to think fundamentally about reassessing our entire strategy in the region. I think that we should say to the generals, we would like to figure out how to get out as rapidly as possible with the safety of the troops involved. And we had better find new and very different strategies because this is too big a problem for us to deal with American ground forces in a direct combat. And we have got to have a totally new strategy for the region because we don't today have the kind of intelligence we need to know even what we're doing. Look, I just think once again New Hampshire is proving why it's first in the nation as a primary because the question is so good.
Governor?